We are from the Radio University of Coimbra. And the first thing I want to ask you is, what is the best advice you can give to young students who aspire to be scientists?
Oh, golly, well, I always tell people that they should keep their eyes on the horizon, keep their feet on the ground, and keep their noses to the grindstone. In other words, you have to work hard. Work hard, play hard. That's really the best advice that I can give.
The knowledge about cancer, it's rising with the scientific research every day, but it's still there is still little practical progress on treatment and cure. No,
that's not true. There's been tremendous advances in treatments and in some cases even cures. Unfortunately, the cancers that we can cure are few and far between. And it still remains true that actually early diagnosis is the main thing that helps. I mean, if you have every 2 years I have to collect samples of my shit so that they can test it for blood, and then they find something, they go and look at my colon. And my mother died of colon cancer because it was not diagnosed until much, much too late. But I have friends who are still alive and very healthily alive who survived colon cancer because it was discovered and cut out before it got out of hand. So that's one good example.
So you don't think that the research is going faster than the practical treatments and cures? Like the knowledge is growing faster than the...
Well, I see where you're coming from. I mean, it is true that we understand a lot about the kind of genes that are mutated in cancer, and we can't do very much about that. That is absolutely true. But I would say that we need to, it's better to know than not to know. And if knowing sometimes leaves you frustrated because there's nothing you can do about it, at least you know what you should be doing, and you keep your eyes open to try and correct that.
Yesterday on the lecture, you said that all Nobel laureates had in common a love for simplicity. Why is that?
Well, it's just a personal observation, because when I was little, when I was your age, I thought I was very clever, I think, and I tried to, you try to think up very complicated explanations for things. And I realized that actually the trouble with complicated explanations, I mean, they might be correct, but on the whole, they're so complicated you can't really understand them. So this simplicity is important, because then you can really understand what's going on. That's the thing. So I noticed that people, my colleagues would sort of ask very simple-minded questions, and they asked simple-minded questions so they could be really sure they understood and make sure they really understood. And the people, I mean, I often find myself completely confused when I hear a talk. And now I'm sort of scared to ask questions because I'll look stupid. But you shouldn't. I mean, because it's usually not your stupidity, but the bad explanation by the person who is doing the talking, or the lack of true clarity of their thought. So I think we understand very well when things are clear, and that's how things should be ideally.
Another thing you said yesterday is that you avoid initiative, network, and strategy. Can you explain it too?
Well, that was a slide that I made up a very, very long time ago, when the way the framework programs of the EU worked was that they had to have networks, and they had to have a Greek or a Cypriot or a Maltese as part of the team. Otherwise, that was the point of these networks. They were part of the human capital mobility program, and they didn't really care about the science, in fact. So it was very much determined against that. And I also think that my experience of doing science is that you can never really plan ahead, because always, really good science always throws up something unexpected. And that's the whole point. I mean, the more unexpected a discovery is, usually the more important it is. And that's what you're trying to do, make important discoveries. So because you can't predict, it's rather hard to have a strategy. Although I suppose, you could say that the strategy was to look in a particular place for the thing. So generally speaking, I prefer to say, look, if we're going to have a strategy for scientific investigation, my only strategy would be to hire really smart people who are prepared to work very hard.
And how do you know, how can you spot on a student that he's good to work with you?
Hard to say, but I can. Usually, I could only tell when they come and work in the lab, actually. And usually within about 1 week, you can tell if they've got it or not. And I would probably have great difficulty in defining exactly what quality, because they come in different shapes and forms. Sometimes it's a degree of persistence, or sometimes it's a sort of sharpness of observation. Sometimes they're very good with their hands. They have sort of green fingers But it's also a way they shape up to tackle a problem. I mean, that the experiments are well designed to investigate the situation, and that the next experiment takes account of the results of the previous experiment, so that there's sort of forward. I mean, you'll be surprised how many people are just prepared to collect data and not really change direction on the basis of the data they collect. So you can tell.
So when a student wants to work with you, you tell him to be 1 week in your lab so you can...
Well, unfortunately that wasn't possible, but when I was in Cambridge, that's exactly what happened. And we used to have 2 or 3 students every year for working for 8 weeks. And some of them were absolutely wonderful. I mean, one of them is now my boss, and another of them is somebody else's boss. And these were really, really outstanding young scientists who are now really, really outstanding old scientists. But there were also some people who were absolutely terrible. But one didn't like to tell them so, but they were. They were just messy and idle and incompetent. So, as you know, students come in all shapes and sizes.
Yesterday, as you explained, your path is very diverse. You were in different institutions. Your lab, there was a fire in your lab. A lot of things happened. Do you think the key to success, to succeed in science, is to do a diverse path, not to stay, not to accommodate in the same area and group?
No, you have to follow your nose. I mean, you have to just follow the trail wherever it leads. And that sometimes there are decisions you have to make. I mean, like I decided that working on the control of the cell cycle was more important and more interesting than what I was doing before. But it was also that had to do with the fact that what I was doing before, I was sort of banging my head against a brick wall and not making much progress. So it wasn't a very difficult decision to make, where one thing isn't working very well, the other looks like a sort of wonderfully promising field. I mean, what would you do? It's obvious that you change, and of course, actually, one doesn't sort of change overnight. It was a sort of more gradual shift in real life. I do think that traveling and going and working in different situations is very helpful. Actually, I think if you stay in one place on one problem, you very quickly get very inward looking, and it really helps to be alive to other possibilities.
Nowadays we see a lot of there in the news. We see a lot of polemic about some articles, the Nature ones about stem cells. A lot of questions about some fake data and stuff. Do you think it happens a lot in science? How to deal with that problem?
Well, I suppose it does. On the whole, the system guards against that because of the refereeing system. But the system is also very robust. For example, recently some Japanese people said that if you simply expose cells to low pH, that turned them into stem cells, and people haven't been able to reproduce that. So that's what should happen, actually, not an investigation of the original people and discover that there was a graduate student who was faking the results. I don't really care about that. I mean, in a sense, we're always faking our results. We're always trying to make them as good as they possibly can be and present them, but we're not trying to it would be very stupid to say that something was which wasn't, because you'll quickly be found. I mean, I don't like making mistakes, and you're stupid if you like making mistakes.
What do you think scientists that just achieve small discoveries and not just they are just a brick in the whole wall of science, can they be fulfilled still in the end, even though they didn't discover something with a huge impact?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I think the edifice of science is very secure and robust precisely because there are so many different kinds of scientists. There are the ones who make big imaginative leaps, and there are the ones who sort of, as you say, build the bricks and fortify the wall behind it. And I think both kinds of activities can be very satisfying, actually. And, one shouldn't neglect the importance of people who are just sort of confirming and consolidating, because often there's some really interesting stories to be told there. I mean, we're all in the business of telling stories. It's nothing, no different from Grimm's fairy tales, except that this is a story about how the world is, which is in some ways even more romantic than the fairy tales, I think.
You worked in the UK and in the United States as a scientist. What was the big difference about?
There was a big difference, which I noticed when I came back from doing my postdoc. So in America, I mean, this is going to be a caricature, there's a very can-do kind of attitude. How can we make that happen? Whereas when I got back to England, I found everyone was saying, ooh, we don't, you don't want to do that, you can't do that. So they always look for reasons not to do things, whereas in America people looked for reasons. So there really was a sort of huge cultural difference. Now, sometimes the Americans were silly and wildly over-optimistic. So, it cuts both ways. But it equally happened in the UK that people were unnecessarily pessimistic about the possibilities. So somewhere in between, as usual, So we veer from the wildly optimistic to incredibly pessimistic and try and maintain a balance somewhere in the middle.
You told us yesterday that when you went to do your PhD, your advisor told you to go to the library and find a problem. How, and again, maybe to young scientists, how to find the problem that is the one new and is going to be a success.
Yeah, no, that's very difficult to do, actually. A friend of mine said that the trick was that the lab head, the boss, should be trying lots of things because it doesn't matter to them whether they succeed or fail. And if they find something that looks like it's going to work, then give that project to a student because they know it's going to work, and it's just a question of whether the student can follow it up. So I think that's quite a good strategy, because otherwise, when you start out, you haven't really got enough experience to know what makes a good problem and what doesn't. Except that, it's, if you have an interesting question and as far as you can see nobody knows the answer, why not have a look? But then, I don't know, I'm just trying to think about, recent graduate students of my acquaintance, and I haven't had one for quite a long time. It depends tremendously on how good they are, actually, as to whether they sort of pick up the ball and run with it, or whether they get stuck. I mean, it's you want a project that will actually make progress. For example, I had one student, and she was actually pretty smart and very good, but she also had, eating disorder problems or something. So that she would sort of, what we call, go off the boil. And then you'd forget why she was doing, and she would forget why she was doing what she was doing. And it was absolutely terrible. So we made her sort of... It was very frustrating for me, and I suspect for her too, actually.
What in Portugal, it happens a lot that the PI is not doing, like you said, the experiments to see whether if it works or not. Is it like that in the UK as well, in the United States, or do you think the key to success is that one you said, the strategy, your friend?
Well, I think it varies a lot, actually. I mean, some people are really good about handling a large number of people in their lab. I was never very good at that, but largely I think because I was actually better at doing experiments than thinking about experiments. So, you know, I mean, it was sort of interesting. I remember the last time I really did a proper experiment, everything worked extremely well. I couldn't understand why everybody else was having so much trouble. But then I had a very good collaborator at the end of my career, and I watched him working sometimes, and I realized that he was doing things that you would have never written down. I mean, he was just very careful about how he actually did the experiments, and he was taking lots of really, you know, he was a true craftsman. And a lot of people don't get that. They just don't understand that, you know, there are certain little tricks you can do to improve the results that you get, and it makes a huge difference. I always used to think I remember once walking into a friend's lab and looking over the shoulder of some student, and I say, "Ooh, he's really good." And I could tell just by looking over his shoulder at the data that he was producing that he was good, because everything was done right. You know, you could just tell they were looking at a craftsman. If they're that intelligent when they're doing experiments, they're usually that intelligent about everything. And it's really strange. I mean, so you get this sort of sixth sense about people, and some people have it and some people don't, but sometimes the ones that don't, it doesn't matter, because, you know, they're so clever and they can, you know, even if the picture is very blurry, it's still beautiful, and you can tell what's going on. Somebody else might have made it much sharper, but it wouldn't have really found out any more than the blurry picture. So it depends on the nature of the problem that you're studying, I think.
Anything else you want to tell the University of Coimbra students that you think we haven't mentioned?
No, I don't think so. I'd just say good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.